Welcome. You're here with Sage Wellness Connection, and we have another wellness webinar for you today. And we have a special guest who's going to explore boredom and loneliness with us today and how we can manage that for ourselves.
I think that it's so exciting when we look to who we are and why Paula and I started this. This just fits so well into that wellness wheel piece that we've been creating and expanding upon. And we did that because we've been involved in this industry, well, what seems like forever, I would say. But in that, we've taken various amounts of education just to build up that credibility and really build the philosophy that we wanted to see in Sage Wellness Connection. And we did that by including psychological health and safety certificate. We're both yoga instructors, and we're still even expanding upon that. We built in that life coaching piece because it's so important to be able to help people through those pieces. We often say it takes a community to raise a child, but I think it takes a community to help people. And that is a big part of what we do in looking at that wellness wheel, helping people build and find a different outcome. And that's all through the mental health based consultation. So it's all those kind of things that have brought me to the table, and Paula and I have collaborated together, having very similar backgrounds. And then we've just gone from there and created Sage Wellness.
Absolutely. And so I think both Shannon and I really like to combine our formal education with more informal practices as well. And like Shannon said, yoga is something that's been very important to both of us because it allows us to really connect to our wellness and in just such a tangible and user-friendly way, I guess, if you want to look at it like that. You can do yoga anywhere. And so that's something that we like to add into our introduction because it doesn't always have to be those expensive formal educational pieces that can support your wellness. So before we get started with our presentation today, we'll take a look at our wellness philosophy and a little bit more in depth into the 8 wellness domains and the wellness wheel that Shannon was talking about. So like when Shannon was explaining a little bit about us, it really is, I think, encompassing that holistic approach to well-being. It's looking at all aspects of our lives and being able to fit wellness into that. And I guess being able to manage your wellness, but also enhance your wellness by looking at the holistic piece to that.
And I think what was important for us is really to break it down into those 8 areas. I know you're going to see various things across the internet of wellness domains and dimensions. Maybe there's 6, maybe there's a continuum. But for us, we really look towards the 8 domains or dimensions because I think it broke it down just a little bit more when we look at that occupational piece right to an emotional piece. But we, of course, like when we talk about the yoga, we never leave out that physical piece, but that's also connected in a spiritual piece. So there's just so many aspects that I think are important that you just never know what area maybe just needs a little bit more work to really support those other areas. And then we can go along in our little bit more supported, healthy, happy life.
Absolutely. And as we move to the wellness wheel itself, we can really see, so this is the 8 domains of wellness. So emotional, spiritual, social, physical, financial, environmental, occupational, and intellectual. So if one area is really out of balance and needs a little bit of TLC, then often other areas are going to be out of sync as well, because like Shannon said, everything is interconnected. So if I'm really struggling with my social wellness, I'm feeling isolated or just, and I think we saw this, COVID is probably a good example with our COVID restrictions. A lot of people were really struggling in their social wellness. And so when that area was low, we saw other areas that also became affected, such as emotional wellness. Spiritual wellness was another big one. And then physical wellness. People weren't able to get out and do what they normally do. And then if we're just looking at this one piece with social wellness and isolation because of COVID, then there was also the occupational wellness because people were working at home, feeling isolated on Zoom calls, all of that. And so it's just really a domino effect. So that is why we like to look to the wheel and how we could use maybe another piece of the of this pie here, so to speak, to be able to compensate and boost up that social wellness. So intellectual wellness is about learning and doesn't have to be formal. It can be informal as well. So I we saw a lot of that, how people um, compensated for not being able to go out by baking and doing arts and crafts and all those things. So really what they were doing was boosting their well-being through trying other activities. And so that's just an example of what we mean when we talk about the wellness wheel.
And I think you bring up such great points, Paula, that we can't forget about that financial piece because the pandemic, out of anything, really brought that to the forefront. It impacted so many people on that financial level. So it was really easy to get focused that maybe that was the piece of the wheel that needed the work. Yet, as we've learned across these 16, 18 months, it impacted each one of those areas. Even the physicality piece, were they out as much as they could be? Because when you're not sleeping as well, that impacts that emotional piece. So it is just like we like to say about that interconnected piece. We can't forget that even though we might be triggered by one piece, whether it be that financial piece, it's often because of these other pieces, because maybe we can't get out of bed in the morning because we're feeling just so overwhelmed. That means we're not going to work. That might mean we're not getting paid. So there's multiple reasons why each one of those areas could be impacted. And we often talk about looking at our wheel like a tire that you don't take care of. And I had that situation happen to me. My tire was low. So the whole vehicle was not functioning as well as it could just because that tire was low in one of the areas. So it's important that we pump up those tires when we have the opportunity, we learn a little bit more, and then we get that balance back in that wheel.
Absolutely. And so we'd like to acknowledge today the Rural Mental Health Project and the Canadian Mental Health Association, as well as they are our sponsors for these webinars. And I think we have a slide here just touching on those. And Shannon will explain a little bit more about the Rural Mental Health Project.
Absolutely. And just before we jump off into our very special guest today, we did want to acknowledge the people behind the scenes sponsoring all of this information, being able to get out to the people, and that is the Rural Mental Health Project. And there's just some key aspects in that project that we like to note and what we truly love because it fits well within our philosophy. And that is that piece that this needs to be a community project, that we need to look to our community and build the capacities within our community because we may have all these wonderful resources around, but we do have this base of strength within the community that often just people don't know about. So that's our first and foremost is acknowledge the community, understand the communities that we're working in, find the strengths within our community as well, and then connect that with everybody. And we'll be talking a little bit more down the road about our mental health resource hub, and that's a piece of that connection. And another important aspect of the rural mental health is that belief that 5 out of 5 people have mental health. Because I think that we've coined this term of mental health and kind of have a negative vibe around it that instead, mental health is a positive thing. Of course, we all have mental health. That's the driving force often of all the things that we do. So we just want to acknowledge that in all people. All people have struggles, but all people have positive things about their mental health. And we look across everyone and knowing that this is impacting everyone all the time. And in saying
Absolutely.
it's also a developmental piece. So we're looking at not just one aspect or one area or one age group. This is a 0 to forever project so that we really want to incorporate everyone and look to those aspects, like today, what we'll be exploring with the boredom and loneliness. we're not just saying there's just one group that has boredom and loneliness and what can they do about it. These are strategies and things that are broad based so that we can look to that and understand it in a little bit better way.
Absolutely. So we'll hand it over to Josh, our special guest, and we'll have him introduce himself and we'll explore the topic today.
Hello, hi Paula, hi Shannon.
Hey.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of this series of webinars and really grateful for the opportunity to present today on what I think is a really interesting topic. And I think it touches actually on a lot of the different pieces of the wellness wheel, especially the social wellness, emotional wellness. And I think it can creep into spiritual wellness, intellectual wellness, and physical wellness as well. So depending on what
Again, perfect example of the interconnectedness of the wellness wheel.
Exactly. Yeah. So this will touch on a lot of different parts of that. But I guess before I get started, I'll introduce myself. So I'm currently living and working in Montreal. I spent many years studying as a classical musician. So music and art is very important to me and to my vision of wellness. But a few years ago, I made the switch over to psychology. So I did a couple years of study at McGill University, and I'm currently working on a doctorate in clinical psychology at the University of Quebec in Montreal. So most of my research has dealt with romantic and interpersonal relationships, the ways that partners see each other, and feelings of being understood by someone that's close to you. And a lot of my intervention work has been in addictions, having most recently worked in a detox center in Montreal. And I've also worked a little bit with older adults dealing with anxiety and depression in the pandemic context. So a lot of the work I've done has touched on in some way these topics of boredom and loneliness, which is the theme that we're going to be exploring today. It is a bit of a more somber topic, but it is very universal, and it's something that we all deal with in one way or another. And when we know how to explore these emotions, they can actually be great tools for wellness and for personal growth and allow us to move towards the more positive aspects. And just a little bit about the way that I like to present. I ask a lot of sort of what seems like obvious questions where the answer seems quite evident, but I really encourage you to try and answer them for yourself in your head before I give the explanation, because sometimes really interesting things can come up and we don't all have the same idea about some of these more basic ideas. And I also like to give a lot of information, so I really encourage you to take what really resonates with you. So if there's a word or an idea that has sort of an energy or it has maybe an effect on you, I think that's a good place to reflect and a good starting point to explore a little bit more.
Wonderful. I'm excited. Let's get started.
Awesome. So first question is, why talk about boredom and loneliness? So when we're talking about wellness and well-being, it might seem like we should almost avoid some of these more negative things and stay in the positive and be working towards what's positive. But I think that these two especially are very important emotions. And as Shannon and Paula have talked about, the social isolation and the distancing because of COVID has that sort of brought these emotions in particular to the forefront for a lot of people. So I think they're very universal. Everyone has to deal with them, but we aren't always very well equipped to deal with them. They're not necessarily things that get talked about and that get taught to us. Another useful way to think about it is why do we have these emotions? What's the point of having these emotions? Why do we need them? And I think Shannon made a bit of a car reference earlier, so I'm going to make my own attempt at a car reference, that they can act as sort of a check engine light, and they can let us know that we need something. So they're a signal about our needs. I'm not a car expert, but what happens if we ignore the check engine light? I think one of the things that can happen is that a small problem can turn into a bigger problem. So if we don't know how to deal with boredom and loneliness, one of the ways we can deal with them is just by ignoring it. And this could actually worsen the underlying problem that we're dealing with. And I think it's especially important to bring attention to these these negative emotions and exploring these feelings, because we live in a society that is very focused on positive emotions. So
Absolutely. And I think also people dismiss this because I think boredom, we often relate that to children. And so people don't even
mhm,
want to address that that could be an issue in themselves. And then loneliness, I think, can be equated with maybe a social stigma,
Yes.
feeling lonely. Why
mhm,
would I be feeling lonely? And sometimes I think you can, I know you'll get into this a little bit more, but that loneliness doesn't necessarily mean that you are alone. And so I think this is a
mhm.
really important topic to look at.
Actually,
Well, I think, go ahead,
sorry.
sorry.
I was just going to say, I absolutely love the car reference. It's not like I know, but I do know that we even have tire lights you should not ignore either. So it's don't ignore the light. It's telling you something. And this is exactly the same. I love it.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and I think we do have this sort of expectation that we should always be happy and excited and busy and going, and so we sort of repress these more somber emotions. And so what I'm going to talk about here isn't necessarily wallowing in these emotions and and spending too much time with them, but it is to recognize them, to sort of get to know them and work with them and work through them. Um, and when we sort of change our perspective on them, they can actually become very useful tools for introspection, and a really good starting point to, even for something like the wellness wheel. If, well, I don't really know where to start, I don't know which aspect I'm lacking on, or which aspect is not doing the best at this time. So these sort of feelings, when we can acknowledge the signal they're giving us, they're very useful tools. So, and something that Paula mentioned a little bit is that there is a little bit of a stigma, or a sort of, we don't want to really acknowledge that we're bored, or not acknowledge that we're lonely. So an important question that comes up is it bad to be bored or lonely? Or should I be worried if I'm feeling bored? Or should I be worried if I'm feeling lonely? Um, and again, we place a lot of importance on positive emotions, but we do forget that it's completely normal to be bored and lonely from time to time. In our society, it's sort of rare that we're bored, because we've got lots going on. Everyone has a very busy schedule. We've got TV, we've got phones, everything's very instantaneous and fast paced. So, so we're not quite used to that, but they can actually be quite positive, and they can provide us an opportunity to look inwards and to introspect. And it can also encourage us to do something for ourselves, or to take care of ourselves. And this can be a bit difficult. It's difficult work to do, because these emotions aren't very enjoyable, as most of us recognize. Um, and it's interesting, to take it a bit more to a neuroscience side, our brains still have a lot of similarities to the brains of early Homo sapien ancestors in Africa, where if you were bored or you're lonely in this more tribal period of our existence, that was actually very dangerous and very life-threatening. And that's sending a signal of, hey, something's really wrong and you need to get it checked. And so when we feel them today, it can create a lot of distress. So it's important to learn to work with them in our modern society context, where they're not necessarily life-threatening. So maybe we can explore them a bit more and see what they can do for us.
Well, and I think it's
Um,
interesting because you talked about everything is instantaneous. We have access to so many things. And I think when we are feeling bored or lonely, it we may question ourselves in also, like, are we lazy? Why am I feeling bored?
mm,
I should be doing something. And so I think exploring this topic is so important to really, like, I like that we could use self-care in this time.
mhm.
Use it as an opportunity is a really great way to look at it.
And making kind of that distinction, right? Is it okay just to be able to sit in silence and allow yourself some time and space? That doesn't mean,
Mhm.
and maybe helping people find that difference between the two is great.
Mhm. I definitely agree. And I think and I think an important distinction to make, especially when we can feel sort of guilty for having these emotions, is you know, it is a very normal, it is normal emotion, but to be able to recognize the line of, is this normal boredom? Is this normal loneliness? Or is this something where maybe I do need to consult a mental health professional? And so I think if you're experiencing boredom or loneliness very regularly, if it's taking up a very large part of your week on a regular basis, or maybe if it's interfering with your ability to function, if you're having a lot of difficulties with your personal life or your professional life, I think it's at those times when it can be useful to consult a mental health professional or maybe talk to your doctor. And Paula and Shannon would be able to connect you to resources in your community, and are both great resources themselves through Sage Wellness Connections. So maybe through this presentation, we'll be able to make some of those distinctions of, is this normal boredom and loneliness, or maybe do I need to reach out to someone to get some help or to talk. And so before we really dive into boredom and loneliness, I had mentioned introspection a couple times, and so I just want to say a few things about that. For me, I like to look at introspection as a first step to wellness. So a good starting point if we don't know where to go on our wellness journey. And so it is a bit of an abstract idea. What does it really mean to do introspection? And so I think a concrete way of looking at introspection is being able to ask yourself questions about your own experience. So I've got a couple just examples of questions of, you know, what am I feeling right now? What is this emotion that I'm sitting with? Or what do I need? Do I need something? Why do I feel like this? Do I like this? Do I not like this? Am I enjoying myself? Or just sort of a general, what's going on with me? And so that's sort of what I mean when I say doing introspection.
And I think that's such a great idea, because you can almost make a little bit of a list, right? And then you're giving some context to some of those feelings, because sometimes we just kind of get lost in that, well, what's going on with me? I don't know. But if we start putting things down, whether it's through journaling or just even on a Post-it note, it sometimes gives you that more concrete information that you're looking for.
We talk a lot about journaling, and that's exactly what I was thinking as well, is these would be great journal prompts if you are trying to explore this a little bit further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I talk a lot about this sort of in a more abstract concept, but some of these ideas that I'm going to be presenting on boredom and loneliness, if for a lot of people, putting a pen on paper is a really great way to sort of focus on it and have it be less overwhelming, less rolling around in our heads.
Yeah.
So now we're going to talk a bit about boredom more specifically, and so I'm just going to go over the big points, the general questions that I'm going to be dealing with. So first of all, again, sort of an obvious question, but what is boredom? What does my boredom look like? So what does it look like specifically for me when I'm bored? Why do we get bored? And is there anything we can do about it? Can we reduce boredom? What are our techniques for sort of dealing with this? And so how to start off, what is boredom? And I think an easy way for me to, when I was thinking about this question, is what are some situations where we experience boredom? I'm not sure for you guys, but I know my go-to is anytime I'm in a waiting room. If I'm waiting for the doctor, waiting for the dentist, waiting for any sort of appointment, that's my go-to boredom situation. I know commercials on TV, we're watching TV. I guess more people are more watching on their computers, but if you are watching real TV and there are real commercials, those sort of in between times. But I think those aren't really offensive. They're very normal. And I'm not sure if those aren't necessarily the times that I think we're really concerned with. But I think if there's other times, maybe we're at work and we're feeling bored, we're at school, we're with people that we care about, or during our free time, those are maybe times where boredom is not necessarily the emotion that we want to be feeling. And so maybe those are more of the instances that are more relevant for our conversation.
And I know for myself, sometimes with boredom, I think because we get very used to having, sorry, you can keep going.
Perfect. We'll come back to, I'm sure we'll make it around back to your point.
When I was just add in the fact of quite often you hear kiddos use that word boredom, right? And I don't think they always understand what that means, but sometimes they are getting it right, but they're not able to maybe verbalize it the way and understand it of when it is a problem and when it isn't a problem, because it's just can be overused as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, and we'll see coming up here when we're talking about what it is, that it actually, we think of it as one feeling, but it actually has quite a few sides to it. So, well, the first side, I think that we can sort of take out from the examples I gave is a lack of interest in things. And so again, if we're in the waiting room or we're in the commercials, maybe I'm not really interested in what these commercials are trying to sell me, but it also could be lacking interest in things that maybe I should be interested in or that should be important to me. Because if I'm at work or if I'm with my family, this is something that I want to be interested in. So that's maybe more when boredom can be a bit of a red flag. And so sometimes it's very normal to be bored, and sometimes maybe not so much. I think another aspect is an inability to relax. So it's very true. Not everything is going to be interesting to me. There's lots of things that I know I don't find very interesting. Um, but there's another aspect to it where we're not able to just sit in that moment. Maybe there's an impatience, maybe there's some agitation, and I think with kids, that sort of agitation, that's an aspect that is very different than the lack of interest.
Absolutely.
And I think boredom might also be it might be about what's missing from the situation. So there might be a lack of excitement or a lack of motivation. So there's a couple aspects to this when we say, okay, well, I'm bored. Well, what exactly does that mean?
And I think that's such a great point about the excitement, because kids will actually take some like almost flack, if you want to say, or negative feedback about that if they're not excited about something. But you're right, maybe there's something else going on, and they're not able to show that. Whether
Mm,
it be lack of interest or even staying motivated in the moment. We see that in kiddos as well. And I think, as parents or outside helpers, that's an important thing, that maybe this is where we're headed down. But we would often put that label on, or are you bored, as opposed to really giving
mm,
them context around that.
mhm. Well, and I think, and now, so we can move a little bit on to, uh, so what does my boredom look like, or what does boredom look like specifically for me? Um, and this brings us back to the introspection part. And so I think it's important to be able to look at your emotion square on, because everyone does feel a bit different. And I think these differences, again, bringing it back to the kids, it will usually tell you a little bit more about what they need or what we need. Because if it has a sort of different shade or a different color, the solution's probably not going to be exactly the same.
Exactly.
And I think that there's an interesting study that I'm going to talk about, that they do interviews with people and ask them to describe their boredom, and then they sort of organize them into these big categories. So I'm just going to give you a few of the different ones that might give a good example of what the things we're sort of talking about. So the first category they give, they say there's wandering thoughts, not really knowing what to do next. I'm open, like I'd be interested to doing something, but I'm not really satisfied with what I'm doing right now in the moment. Another type could be feeling more agitated. This one has maybe a more negative feeling. I don't want to be here. I want to be doing something else. I'm not feeling super great. And a third example is of feeling bored is maybe more detached, maybe more low energy, uh, maybe a more unpleasant feeling, and of wanting to be helped or wanting to be out of the situation. And so more concretely, I think this first example, it could maybe be a little bit of understimulation. So maybe we need more stimulation. We need something to do. Maybe we're having some problems making some decisions, not very decisive in what we want. The second one maybe involves a bit more anxiety. So we have an energy, but we don't quite know where to put it. We don't know what to do with it. And the third one, maybe we're feeling a bit more down, a bit more blue, a bit more depressed, not using that word maybe more lightly. So, and that way we can see, okay, well, definitely the solution for those three different types of boredom is definitely not going to be the same.
Mhm.
And so now that we've seen a little bit of what boredom can look like, it might be interesting to ask, why do we get bored? And this might give us some more insight on how to deal with when we do feel bored. Um, and so to think back to the situations we talked about where we do get bored, commercials, waiting room, things like that. A lot of the times, these aren't things that we would necessarily choose to do or that we'd be willing to do. That's not my first choice to be waiting in the dentist waiting room. So an aspect of lack of choice or lack of control can lead to boredom. This isn't what I want to do. This isn't what I'm feeling right now. So I'm feeling kind of uninterested and bored. Um, Another aspect that I would see a lot of this working in addictions rehabilitation is where someone has adapted to a high stimulation environment. And this is very, again, to sort of take a neuroscience stance on this, this can have an effect on the brain and the way we react to different activities and situations. So this is sort of, in addictions, this is sort of an extreme case when someone is using substances on a regular basis. And so oftentimes when they come and they want to get sober and they find out that at that moment, life isn't necessarily very enjoyable for them, and there's not a lot of pleasurable activities. And this I found kind of actually makes sense. So if things are very intense and very exciting for a long period of time, then when you stop these substances, it kind of makes sense that things are feeling a little bit bland.
Mhm.
And a lot of us can't necessarily relate to this more extreme example, but surprisingly, we do a lot of things in our daily lives that sort of mimic this effect on a smaller level. So basically, when we're doing things that are rewarding to us, I'm going to use this word rewarding a couple times, and what I mean is they're very enjoyable, and the brain will release a neurotransmitter called dopamine, which makes us feel good. And so this can be anything. This can be reading a book, eating a good meal, talking to a friend, doing some sort of sports. So we do an activity we like, we enjoy it, and the brain releases dopamine. And so for a brain, not all of these activities are equally rewarding, which makes sense. Some things make the brain release a ton of dopamine, and others maybe just a more moderate amount. And so the way I like to look at this is that we can rate these activities on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the least interesting and 10 being the most rewarding, the most dopamine, the most pleasure, I guess. And so in our society, we're actually used to having a lot of things that are way up there on this dopamine scale. So we've got TV with lights and colors and sounds. We've got our phones with apps and notifications that are built by psychologists to be making us release dopamine. We're always listening to music and to podcasts. We've got sugary foods, coffee, cigarettes, pop, alcohol. And so with these things these are very commonplace things that most of us do. It almost seems to me that we're sort of idling on an 8 out of 10 all the time. And so when we do a lot of the activities that we would talk about, like going for a walk or reading a book, which are very healthy, very good for us, but on the excitement scale, there may be more of a 5 out of 10 than an 8 out of 10. And so when we're used to being on 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 all the time, when we're going down to a very good, solid 5 out of 10, it doesn't necessarily feel quite as satisfying. And so when we're adapted to this, it might actually predispose us to feeling more bored sometimes.
I would think that even with lands, I keep coming back to the kiddos, but if they're also coming from an environment where there is a lot of stimulation all the time, and they're never taught or modeled something where you could actually sit back, it's a bit like that reading or something that's down below that 5 out of 10 piece. It must be
Mhm.
really difficult not to be up there and then feeling bored, right? If we can't meet that all the time.
Mhm.
Well, and I think as well for adults, I mean, you look at a workplace. If you're in a workplace, there's phones, there's computers, there's people talking. I know in our workplace, there's people coming in and out all the time. And then maybe have to go to the grocery store after work, and you get in the car, you have music, you get to the grocery store, there's people and music, the noise from the tills, all of it. And there's an announcement coming on. And so I think definitely now that you're saying that, it makes a lot of sense that we are in a high stimulation environment. And I was also thinking about something that we also have is schedules, and we're very scheduled all the time. And I think when we have unscheduled time, I think that's a little bit of time to be bored as well, because we're not sure what to do because we don't have anything scheduled.
If you go back to that lack of choice and control, right? If you've got employment that is telling you when to do things, how to do things in a certain stimulated style environment, and then you're left to your own devices when you're on the outside of that, and we don't put the same intention and time into that, you could see where I would kind of create that sense of, oh, I'm lonely, I'm bored, whatever it might be on this side, because in this situation, I have no control, but I'm used to everything. And now it's up to me to make this happen on this side.
Well, and I think that that idea of being structured and having this sort of strict environment. So we were talking about being up on 8, 9, 10, and then trying to go down to 5. But when we think about it, we really never go down to a 1 or a 2. And that can actually be a really healthy place to have a couple hours of the day where there's nothing going on, no sounds, no people running around, just silence. And that can make those 5 out of 10 activities actually seem a little bit more stimulating, more exciting.
For sure.
And so I think another element that can lead to boredom is not having the right level of challenge in our daily activities. So either we're doing activities that are too challenging, or maybe that are not challenging enough. And so when we're trying to figure out if an activity is enjoyable or not, we often mention how easy or difficult it is. And so one of the reasons we can really enjoy an activity is when it's in that sweet spot in the middle of not being too easy, but also not being too difficult. And I think a good example of this is something like board games. So if we're going to take, a children's board game ages 2 and up, where we have to put the red pieces in the red box and the blue pieces in the blue box, and that's it. We can play that game for a couple of minutes and then, but there's no challenge. So there's no interest and we get bored. But we could also take something like chess, and I know lots of people like chess, but it is a little bit complicated for me. I get a bit bogged down in the rules and the strategy, and there's not enough flow just because I haven't practiced enough yet. So that's an example on the other end for me where it's a bit too challenging. I'm not there yet, so I get a little bit bored. And this example is a bit trivial, but I think it's easy to apply to something like work or things we're doing around the house where, okay, I'm feeling a little bit bored. Well, maybe this is too easy for me. Or maybe I've been doing this every day for 10 years, so I need something a bit more challenging. Or even just to say, oh, well, maybe I'm not there yet. Maybe I still have a bit more to learn, and maybe it's not that bad that I'm feeling bored. I just need to keep with it and I'll catch up. And then once I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable with the task, that I'll be feeling a little bit more comfortable in my emotions. So
it's just a great point, because even if you take that kind of same idea and put it back in the workplace, so many people kind of land in that, especially if they're coming into a job that they're just new to. It can be challenging, right? We know the learning curve can be fairly high, but if you can get the right support at the right time, it doesn't become too challenging. But it's also challenging enough because you're learning lots, but you have somebody there to support you so you don't get bogged down by all the things you don't know. But then on the flip side, somebody who's been there 20 years, right, is maybe getting a little stagnant, right? Because it is just repetitive things. It's like you can't even hear one more time somebody complaining about something because you've heard it, 100 times a year.
Right.
So it's challenging them, maybe giving them something new to focus on, so they're not just wallowing in that boredom piece, because it's just they're not learning anything new.
Well, and then that's exactly where, when we look into these emotions, we can find solutions that are a bit more concrete. So instead of saying, oh, well, I'm bored, I must not like this job, this must not be a good fit for me, we can actually say, oh, well, maybe I'm not being challenged enough, or I'm being challenged too much and I need to reach out for some support. And so that's where we can, instead of maybe abandoning a situation, we can seek the help that we need, or seek the stimulation we need to move past that challenge.
And I think
Absolutely.
what fits well for kind of us and our wellness philosophy is we really like to work towards that strength-based approach, right? And that's different for everybody. So we're not saying that what challenges one person may not challenge the next person, but that's okay. We each bring our own strength to the table, and then we can also challenge each other in the same way.
Mm. Well, and now that so now we've looked at boredom under a microscope and sort of examined it a little bit. But again, so ideally, this is an emotion not that we want to ignore, but that we want to pass through and that we want to work with so that we can move on to something else, and to find meaningful solutions to this emotion.
And
And
I like what you
so
said, work with it. We're not working against it. It's not something that we need to fight.
exactly right, because again, it's telling us that we need something, and so we're not
Mhm.
there to judge it. We're there to work with it. And so I've outlined 3 steps that I find that reflect some of the ideas we've talked about. And this isn't in any specific order, but it can just help us make this a bit more concrete. And so I think it can be a useful first step would be to identify and to accept the boredom. So first to ask yourself, is this really boredom? Am I bored, or is there maybe another emotion that's there? Maybe I'm actually feeling physically tired, or maybe I'm hungry, or maybe I'm sad about something, or maybe I'm frustrated. But once we sort of nailed it down, no, this is boredom. This is what I'm feeling. Then the next step would be to accept it. And so again, this doesn't mean admitting defeat and admitting that we're going to be bored for the next 10 years. This means, okay, well, that's what my body's telling me. I don't need to question whether I should be bored or whether this is a good or a bad thing to be bored. It's just, okay, well, I'm bored, and now I'm going to commit to addressing it and to working with it. And I think it's useful here to remember that our brains and our bodies really are sending us a message, and the message is boredom. So I think that gives us a useful signal to move on to this next step, which could be doing some introspection and to ask ourselves some important questions. And we did talk about this a little bit, but just to reiterate them, one question could be, why am I bored? Or what do I need? And this can move us into finding some more concrete solutions. So a couple of these we've touched on briefly, but we might try and taking a break from overstimulating activities. I think my number one for this is putting away our cell phones more regularly. A hard one to do, but really is an hour makes a big difference when we're trying to sometimes people try and dive off the deep end and say, okay, I'm going a week without my phone, but 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, that will you will notice a difference. So taking some quiet time each day is also very important. And again, when we talked about the high stimulation environment, really quiet, of nothing's going on, nothing's moving, nothing's playing in the background, really just silence, and that can be very useful. Or maybe our introspection will sort of lead us on a different path and show us that our boredom is because we aren't being challenged, or so this can allow us to find something new to learn or new to try. Or maybe it will show us that we're bored every day because we do the same thing, and we maybe need a little bit more variety in our activities. So we just need to switch it up a little bit.
Well, and I think with another thing, um, and so this kind of along the lines of taking a break from high stimulation. Shannon and I talk a lot about mindfulness and taking mindful moments. And I know for me,
Mm,
when you were talking through these concrete solutions, I was just thinking about something that I'm trying to do is not multitask, because I find when I'm multitasking, it actually creates a little bit of anxiety. And then there was something that you said earlier, and then I think you kind of get frustrated, and maybe it was that when we were talking about things that were either too challenging or not challenging enough, and then you kind of just give up because you're feeling a little bit frustrated, you're not really sure what's going on. And I think then we come back to that introspection. It's like, well, it's because you're doing too many things, you don't really know what the next step is, you just aren't in the moment really seeing what's right in front of you. And I think that is something that we need to look at, because we do that too much in society. with the expectations for us to get so many things done are there, and we really need to take a step back and be a little bit more mindful and in the moment.
And I think we've really promoted, that taking a break from high stimulation, whether you're at work or even at home. And because I think often we don't see home life as work, but it can be a whole
Mhm.
lot of work when you're at home. It's just take that walk outside, give yourself a break from feeling you have to do something. And whether it's a quick walk or a sitting outside and just allowing yourself to have a moment that you aren't doing exactly what you said, Paula. So it isn't feeling like there's so many things coming at you, but you
Mhm.
take a break from that really high stimulation, no matter what setting you're in.
Absolutely.
Well, and I really like that this mindfulness aspect as well, because sometimes we think of multitasking just as a productive thing, but I
Mhm.
find, especially in our technological society, we have such easy access to music and to TV and to all these things. So I find myself, okay, well, I'm going to go do the dishes. Well, I'm going to listen to a podcast while I do the dishes, or I'm going to watch a show while I'm folding my laundry. And these are sort of things that, oh, we can just do one thing at a time, and really, I'm going to fold my laundry and I'm going to be in the calm and the quiet, and I'm going to spend 15 minutes and do that. And that in itself is taking a break from that high stimulation. So even though they may be enjoyable things that we like to do, when we've got so much going on simultaneously, it can get our brains a little bit worked up.
Well, it would be interesting to see if we reduce some of the like we're talking about the high stimulation, the multitasking, and just do one thing at a time. I wonder if eventually that boredom would be reduced because our expectations aren't like bells and whistles and lights and all of that, right? Our brains are okay just to do one thing.
hmm
So.
hmm Um, and I think a last technique that I haven't mentioned yet, is giving meaning to our activities. And again, so this is a little bit abstract, but concretely, I would say it's asking ourselves, why am I doing this? Why do I like this activity? What's motivating me to do this? And this is with activities that maybe we're feeling bored, but it's something that we should be interested in or that we want to be interested in. Um, and so this is asking these questions instead of going about our activities automatically. And so from one side, these sort of questions might make us realize, oh, well, maybe I actually don't want to be doing this activity. It's not important to me. It doesn't fit with my values or my interests. And then from there, we can work on finding a new path or a new activity. But it also might allow us to connect with the reason that we started doing that activity in the first place. So maybe I'm doing an activity and it's not very enjoyable to me. And it's like, well, why am I doing this activity? Well, maybe I started doing it to connect more with my partner. And so maybe if I focus more on that aspect, I can find some of the joy in this activity again. Or maybe I'm doing it because I want to help other people. And so reconnecting with that meaning can really bring me out of the boredom and engage me in that activity. And I think, especially with personal activities, something like painting, I think is a good example. And I would like to do painting because I like connecting with my visual side, and I like to express myself. But if I'm getting bored while I'm doing it, well, it's like, okay, those are my reasons. So maybe instead of focusing on being perfect and efficient, I need to really focus on why am I doing this, and focus on, okay, well, I like the mixes of colors and I like finding ways that I can express myself through this activity. So sort of just turning your attention to the real motivations and the real meanings of why you're doing those activities. And this can give us some more tools to work through our boredom instead of having to ignore it or having to be frustrated with it.
Mhm.
Such a great point, because I think often it's exactly like the painting, or whether it be journaling, or any one of those activities, we get involved for various reasons. Maybe somebody's brought us there, or we just initiated the idea, this is what we're going to start. But like Paula said, then we have multiple things going on, or you had mentioned, or we're listening to a podcast and we're making sure the laundry's going and we're painting. And so it almost feels like a bit of a stress that the painting
Mhm.
longer just the painting, it's all these other activities, and then I gotta remix this paint because I was upstairs too long. That's, if you just step back and think, because I know I've had to do it myself, step back and say, oh right, I just wanted to paint, I just wanted some time to not really think about anything more than blending some colors together and seeing what happens, but without worrying about the laundry or what everybody else is doing or what we're having for supper. Such a great.
Mhm.
Mhm. And I think that sort of wraps us up on boredom, where we've talked a little about what it is, why do we feel that way, how can I use my introspection to work through it, and now we have some concrete solutions that'll help us um, work through it and maybe move past it. So um, now we're going to talk a little bit about loneliness and how to address those feelings. So again, I'm gonna hit some of the same big questions. What is loneliness? Why do we get lonely? What does loneliness look like for me? And is there anything we can do about it? Can we reduce loneliness? And then just to tag on the end of this one, I'm going to talk a little bit about connecting with others. So, as with boredom, loneliness is an emotion that all of us feel from time to time, and that we all became particularly aware of during COVID socially distanced periods. So what is it exactly that we mean when we say loneliness? Um, and I think one aspect is feeling isolated. And so this we're really talking about feeling like there's a distance between us and other people, or really feeling like we're alone. And I think there's this alone feeling, but there's also the other side where there's a desire to connect with other people, or there's maybe a longing to be with others or to be part of a group. So maybe we don't necessarily feel alone, but we feel this pull to be closer to other people, and we don't have that. And this is where I think some people can really beat themselves up a little bit if they're feeling lonely and they say, "Well, I'm not alone. I do have people around me. I shouldn't be feeling alone. That's bad." And well, maybe your loneliness is coming from a desire to be closer. And so we don't have to look at as a bad thing, but as something, where we want to connect even more. And that's actually something I think, very beautiful and very positive. So, and I think there's another aspect where we might be unsatisfied with either the amount of relationships we have or with the quality of relationships we have. And again, this isn't passing a judgment, but this is maybe just sort of looking inwards and saying, okay, well, what really is the problem? What's making me a little bit worried or feeling lonely? And so this might mean that we do feel close to some people, but maybe not as many as we would like, or we just really do have too much time where we're alone, where we're not with others. It also might mean that we have lots of casual relationships, but none of them are very close or very intimate, that everything's maybe a little bit surface level, and we want to work on building those connections up. And this also can mean that we do have close, intimate relationships with other people, but that we feel maybe a distance has come between us. So we aren't able to connect in the ways that we would like, or that maybe we feel a little bit isolated with our own thoughts and feelings, and we want to be able to share those a little bit more. And so I think that covers a little bit some of the more obvious reasons that we would get lonely, when we're missing a connection or missing some intimacy with other people. But I think loneliness, and we did mention this earlier, that it can come about in quite a few different ways. And some of these might be a little bit less obvious than we think. The first one is still a bit more obvious. It's considering specific events or specific changes that we go through. So if I'm feeling lonely or I'm feeling a little bit isolated, I can look around and see what's going on in my life. And this could be something as obvious as a breakup, or a life transition, like changing jobs, changing schools. It can happen when we're moving or we're new to a community, or maybe in times of grief where we've lost a loved one, and those are the events that are making us feel that way. But I think another factor that can be a little bit more subtle is the influence of comparing ourselves to other people. And this pressure from the outside is extremely present in our social media age, and we're bombarded with images of other people's social lives. And I think I like the developmental key that you're both talking about earlier, where we're talking about certain age groups, and this is something that we do sort of put off as something only teenagers are influenced by. So the kids are on Instagram and the kids are on TikTok, and they're seeing all this and they're feeling lonely because they're influenced. But our brains are very conscious of this social information, And it's very natural. And this happens without us even realizing, where we, you see something on Facebook and we don't necessarily consciously say, oh, well, their life is this and my life is this, but these comparisons are happening. And this is something that's, we don't want to feel left out, and we don't want to feel left behind. And so this can have a really big influence on our feelings of loneliness. Because
Absolutely.
even if in reality we have enough important people surrounding us, maybe these comparisons are making us feel a certain kind of way.
Well, and it's a bit of the iceberg effect, right? What we may not quite acknowledge, that we're maybe a little bit envious, or just even like looking at someone else's life, but underneath the surface, those feelings are kind of there swirling around, thinking, why can't I go to Hawaii? Or, oh, they went to the mountains, that looks beautiful. But then underneath there's that little bit of like something bubbling slightly, and it's, brings a bit of a dissatisfaction to our own lives, even though we're not consciously comparing or even consciously envious or jealous. Sometimes there's just that little bit of those bubbles beneath the surface, questioning just even what we're doing with our lives, questioning why we're not doing that. Maybe we have the ability to do that. Maybe our, finances are okay, but it's that breaks down a little bit of our own self-esteem, and why aren't we doing that?
And I think it's too an opportunity to really challenge our bias and judgments, because
Mhm.
the social media piece, right? Maybe Sally looks like she is involved with family, traveling the world, all of these things, but then Sally comes and says, I'm feeling really lonely. And we're like, come on, Sally,
Mhm.
how
Yeah.
could that be? You were just in Paris last week, right? And so we kind of had that judgment. If you've got all of those things, how could you possibly be lonely? So it is,
Mhm.
right? We don't know what's below the surface. And sometimes then it does bubble things up even for ourselves to say, whoops, and maybe I'm doing the same thing and I didn't even know.
Right.
Mhm. Well, and I think it's interesting, because there is a very conscious part where we need to challenge these ideas of, this is what I'm seeing, and maybe it's not the reality. But then there's
Mhm.
also an aspect where we can still do that. We can say, oh, well, I know everyone's showing their best side and no one's really that happy. But we do still kind of have a monkey brain. And so I can say that to myself, but if I'm scrolling through Facebook for 2 hours, there's a part of my brain that is registering all of that, and that is saying, well, you don't have that, you don't have that, you don't have that. And so sometimes the machine is a little bit smarter than we are. And so our solution is, if we can't beat it, maybe we need to just take a step back from it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so I think, and another factor that is also very subtle, but it can have a big influence on our feelings of loneliness, is our self-esteem. And so it's possible that, again, we're surrounded by people that love us and people that are very close to us, but that our loneliness might come more from somewhere inside of us. And so we might have fears of not being liked, or of not being worthy of the love that others have for us. And this sounds a little bit dramatic and very serious, but a lot of us have these insecurities
Oh,
on some level or
absolutely.
another. And so regardless of the outside situation, sometimes the ways our insecurities can lead us to feel a little bit isolated from the people that are here for us and that care for us and that are spending time with us. So even
Well,
though
Yeah.
things
it's
are,
almost like loneliness becomes the symptom of something deeper.
mhm, mhm.
And even that
Well,
judgment we place on ourselves, right? I think can lead down these paths. Like we can be pretty harsh critics on ourselves. And that plays into that self-esteem piece. Even when, like you said, Josh, you may have all these supportive people around you, but if you're your harshest critic and you can't see what all these people are telling you, it really does play out really negatively too.
well, and that's in a lot of these situations, there's, when we look around or we check on paper, it's like, well, no, I have great family, great friends, great work, but something still feels a little bit off. And that can be a time where maybe we need to look to some of these more subtle aspects that can influence our loneliness. And so now we'll look, why am I feeling lonely? And this is more of a focus again on the introspective aspect, to find these answers within ourselves, because everyone feels lonely for different reasons. And so we can spend some time again talking about the journaling, trying to describe exactly what we're feeling. What are the nuances and colors of this emotion? And what does it really feel like for me to be lonely? And then, so this is an exercise that I find particularly useful in introspection. To make it a bit more concrete, is asking questions using the 5 W's. So who, what, when, where, why. And this is especially useful when we're dealing with feelings that we don't go into very often, or that maybe are a bit uncomfortable or foreign to us. And so this isn't, I don't necessarily have any specific questions that we have to ask when I'm saying who, what, when, where, why, but it can be a good jump start. So for example, for who, if I'm feeling lonely, well, maybe it's, well, who do I miss right now? Who do I want to be spending time with? Or who do I feel close with? Who makes me feel less lonely? Or who am I around when I'm feeling lonely? Or just any sort of who question that comes to mind. And I think here, sort of trusting your instinct and just going with the questions that pop into your head and following those, that can lead you somewhere interesting. And it usually gives us some clues to what to do next, or to what is the source of those feelings. And I think an important aspect of this is to be specific. And so when we're trying to get more details from ourselves, we want to use these details to find solutions and to move forward. So we want to be giving ourselves the most tools, putting as many things in our basket as we can. And so really not taking things for granted or brushing off things as obvious, but sort of, I like thinking of this as copying the way that kids ask questions. You know, there's this sort of endless stream of why, and sort of taking things at face value. So an example I have of this is saying you're someone, and this happens a lot, people who've transitioned to working at home, and maybe you've noticed that you're sort of feeling lonely. So asking myself, okay, well, why am I feeling lonely? And the answer might seem a little bit obvious. Well, I'm at home alone all day and I miss being around people. And so that's sort of the first step of the introspection. And I think that's a very good starting point. But then we need to dig a little bit deeper. Okay, well, why do I miss being around people? What is it exactly that I miss? Because for everyone, it might seem a little bit obvious, but everyone might give a little bit of a different answer. So some people might, I just miss having people around me, just the presence of someone else. Someone else might say, well, I miss just friendly small talk, just sort of kindness and warmth from people in my office. And other people, maybe I miss more deeper discussions. I miss being able to share my thoughts and worries, or I miss hearing exciting news from what my colleagues did that weekend. And other people not necessarily chatting or talking, but just doing things with other people or working as a team. And so that's where, when we take it at face value and say, well, why exactly am I feeling this emotion? Why specifically? Because when we pinpoint it, it can make the next step seem a little bit less daunting. So we can go from something huge, like I feel lonely and isolated, to something more specific, like I miss connecting with my colleagues and catching up on their lives. Where the first one is, I don't know how to deal with feeling lonely and isolated, but the second one is, well, maybe I can give my colleagues a call and see what they did this weekend.
Yeah, it's taking something that seems so enormous and really, like, lonely is so abstract, really, when you think about it, right? And making it more tangible in that I'm missing that connection. I think that's a great way to look at it.
And it allows for that unique piece, right? Because we would all look at it differently, even the who, what, when, where, and why, right? We all might come up with different answers. So it's really allowing for that individual piece to it. I like that.
And then do you ever find, Josh, in your work, that people get confused with bored and lonely?
Oh,
And so
I
when
think
you're asking often, right, and you're asking the your who, what, when, where, why questions, is it really that, oh, I actually just am bored?
Well, and I think that we're in a place in our society where we're so distanced from our emotions that
Mhm.
it's not just boredom and loneliness. It's boredom, lonely, hungry, tired, angry, frustrated. That's just I don't feel good, and
Yeah,
so
fearful,
this
all
can
of it.
really exactly, and this can really help us sort of give ourselves some tools, because it's almost like if you have a baby that's crying. Well, what does the baby need? It could be a list of 100 things, and I don't know where to go. And it's the same with ourselves, where when we don't know what the next step is, well, thankfully we have the ability to ask ourselves these questions, and and ask very specific, small, detailed questions that are easy to answer, and that can help us move on to these next steps, which is now that we have this information, what can we do about it? How can we reduce our feelings of loneliness? um, and so again, I broke this down into 3 steps that are a little arbitrary, but are help us deal with this more concretely. um, and so loneliness, I think, can be a little bit excuse me, more difficult than boredom, because it's a little bit more daunting, and it can be a little bit more stressful, because again, it triggers these sort of ancient tribal parts of our brains where they're saying, don't be lonely, don't get left out of the tribe, because the consequences are very serious. And so this means that when we do get lonely, it can be very intense. Or uh, I think an important aspect is that it creates a sense of urgency, and it makes us feel like we have to solve this problem right now, immediately. And so that's where I think this first step is actually very important. Um, and so taking care of ourselves and not putting too much pressure on ourselves. So I think that feeling close and connected with other people really does take time. And so really allowing ourselves to have that time and to be patient is very important. So I have here taking it slow. That can be really important, because when we sort of give in to this feeling of urgency, and I'm lonely, so it needs to be solved in the next 10 minutes, I think that doesn't really set us up for success. But when we sort of take a step back,
Do you think
that can
impacted, like with all of the social media, right? Is everything seems so instant. People are in new relationships, there's new things happening, and then we feel left behind. So I like that idea of that approach, right? Take it a little bit slower.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, well, where this comparison is so easy, where we see, if we have 500 Facebook friends, maybe only 20 of them posted something new, but that makes us feel like, oh, everyone's going, everyone's lives are rolling ahead, and everyone's making new friendships and in new relationships and in new jobs. And so we really feel this need to this urgency.
Mhm.
I see the potential of maybe jumping into some type of relationship or something, right, that isn't appropriate or is potentially even harmful because of that loneliness driving it, as opposed to just taking it, like you're saying, taking it slow to really evaluate those things if this is the right direction we should go.
Mhm. Well, and I think even for existing relationships, if I'm suddenly feeling lonely and I'm feeling stressed and I need to do something about it, I'm texting 3 of my friends, or we need to hang out tonight because I'm feeling this way, when really maybe I need to take the night and just sit in this feeling and see what's going on, and plan something for this week, or plan something for the next
Mhm.
day. And we
Yeah.
do have that time, and we're not going to lose anything in the next, 2-3 weeks, that we can take that time to really figure out what we need and what we want. And so I think another aspect of the taking care of ourselves is really working on our feelings of loneliness from the inside out, and being able to be happy with ourselves, and focusing on the positive aspects of, I'd like you both mentioned, the strength-based approach to self-esteem. Even so, what do I like about myself? What's good about myself? What am I putting out into my community? What am I giving to the people around me? And this is a big, and I think self-love and self-esteem are really big topics that we won't even scratch the surface of today. But I think considering that aspect as a part of the wellness journey is really important.
Something for myself that I think I had to learn as part of taking care of myself and dealing with those feelings of um, maybe not, like, I guess in talking about the social media kind of influence, was self-acceptance, and to realize that maybe one person is at a barbecue and another person is on a trip to Europe and all of this, and it's like, well, I had to figure out that I needed to be okay with myself. Do I really, if I had a chance to be at a barbecue right now, would I want to be there? Or would I
Mhm.
want to be doing, whatever someone else is doing? And really look at myself and be okay that if the answer was no, I'm okay where I'm at, that's great. And I can just be happy with myself in the moment.
I like that because it edges on that personal responsibility piece, right?
Hmm.
That one, we're not putting that self-love or self-esteem on somebody else to bring that to us. We're taking the personal responsibility to say, okay, yeah, these things might have been available to me, but would I have gone?
Exactly.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and I think that plays in with the urgency as well, where when we see something happening, oh well, I'm missing it. It's going on right now, and we sort of have this feeling, well, I missed it. It's too late. It's over. It's never going to happen again. There's never going to be anything else that I want to do again. And we sort of spiral into this thing when we can really say, oh well, why do I want to be there? What am I missing? Oh well, I would like to connect with this friend. Well, instead of panicking about not being at this thing that's already going on, well, maybe I can take it slow and give myself the opportunity to have what I really want
Mhm.
later.
Yeah, and be
Um,
okay with yourself.
Yeah.
exactly, and to say, well, what do I really want? Not what am I seeing and what am I jealous of or what am I missing
Mhm.
out, but what do I want for myself? And so I think another good step after we've focused a little bit inward is to focus on the present moment and to focus on what's happening around us. And so, because loneliness can be a little bit intense, it can actually be useful to take a step back and again to look at what's going on around us. So here I'm gonna say it again, but the disconnecting from social media can be very useful. Um, and it might make us feel like we're connecting with people in the short term, but really allowing ourselves to take a break and to focus on the real things and the real relationships. This can bring about a sense of connection that's a little bit more calm and a bit more secure. And I think another one that is really useful is spending time in nature. And this doesn't need to be, it can be, but it doesn't need to be as extreme as going to the Rockies for a week to be hiking and to completely lose yourself. But it really can just be a 10-minute walk around the block or
Mhm.
around town.
Well, and
Um,
access your what's in your community
Yeah.
for walking paths. I think, I don't know how many times we've talked about this, Shannon. Even last winter in our small community, they had made um, ice paths for skating on. Like, really look around your community and see what's there and access right locally. And I think that would actually build that feeling of connectedness to your community, to your
mhm,
surroundings. And it's accessible and often free.
Yes.
mhm,
That's such a great point because we do look at the bounce and all of that and have these wonderful fantasies about this awesome hike or we're going to go skiing, but it's a whole lot of money. But this is something we almost need to do if we could do daily, even if we just take that 10 minutes and then it's not out of pocket per se. It's just
Mhm.
spent. And then we are connecting. And then we could be more purposeful if that is something we want to do that's bigger and broader, like going to BAM. But we haven't given up our daily routine to wait for that to happen.
It's a bit of the stop and smell the roses mentality. What is,
mhm,
again, focusing on the present moment, what is right in front of us that we are often missing because we are, in our heads, we're worrying, we're thinking about the past, thinking of focusing on the future, and we're missing what's in front of us.
And I think we even do
mhm,
that as simple as our kayaking, right? Sure, it'd be awesome to go to these big places or big lakes, but we have some really beautiful little lakes around us that we can just
Mm.
pop out and actually be communing in nature within 20 minutes. So why
Yeah,
would we take advantage of that?
absolutely.
mhm. And I think another the mindfulness aspect that we talked about before is especially important, because if we're going to take our 10-minute walk outside, but we're still sort of letting these thoughts and feelings, and we're going for a 10-minute walk to sort of ruminate on the things that were already bothering us, I'm not sure that's necessarily effective. So I think being present and really observing what's going on around you, because it's surprising how often I've walked this block in Montreal. I've walked it hundreds of times, but if I really go out with the goal of being present and observing what's going on, I always see new things. And so really giving yourself the space to notice the sights and the sounds, to feel the temperature, to what does the sky look like today, and really engaging in your surroundings, I think that's what can really make a big difference in these situations when we're feeling these sort of distressing emotions.
And I think I'd almost take your disconnecting from social media um, in an additional direction about, sure, flip through those pictures, but have like a realistic look at that of not internalizing always what we see. Just allow it just to be a really nice picture of somebody or something, and not connecting and putting too much meaning in that one little picture that you see flipping by as well.
Hmm. Definitely. To changing our perspective on something can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
And so I think the last technique I put up is probably the most obvious solution, but I think it is one of the harder ones to do, and that would be to make connections with others. And so I've got a couple short points, and then we're going to talk about it a bit more in detail. But so this can be really, some more simple solutions would be, sending a text, making a phone call, or starting a conversation, or proposing an activity with someone that you live with. So just even on a really basic level, the reaching out is a lot of is a big important step in that process. And I think it can also be very useful and therapeutic to talk about being lonely. And again, there can be a big stigma around this, or we can sometimes feel a little bit guilty for, bringing other people down. But I think there is an important time and place to share with people how we've been feeling. And this can actually help bring you closer, and can help get rid of some of the feelings of embarrassment or shame that come along with feeling lonely, because there is one thing of feeling lonely, but then there's another thing of feeling lonely and then embarrassed about feeling lonely and then feeling ashamed about feeling lonely. And so when these emotions sort of start to stack on top of each other, it can lead to a more difficult situation than we might be in otherwise.
It's
And I
it's the
think,
it's the vicious circle, just
Mhm,
circling around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly. Well, and I think one of the last smaller techniques is, um, to a great way to connect with other people is by helping other people. And so this can be, I think we sort of have the idea of going out and doing volunteering, which I think is really great and can be a good long-term way of building meaningful connections. But this can also be at a smaller level of just lending a hand to someone, doing something very simple, or even really just holding the door for someone. And these really brief moments of warmth and kindness can do us a lot of good. And I think allow us to sort of step outside of ourselves, even just for a moment. And that can in itself can provide some relief.
I had to really shift my thinking when it comes to making connections, because I am more of an introverted person and more of a homebody, and so I don't crave that large circle of friends. I don't necessarily get my energized from big groups of people, and so I had to make. For me, I really learned to make connections in my workplace with my coworkers, and often that's enough for me. But you have to be purposeful and have that intention to actually get to know people and connect at a deeper level. And I think that that's where workplace wellness, Shannon and I talk a lot about, that is very important. Taking your breaks, having lunch together, you know, having activities in the workplace is very helpful for building connections, and learning to communicate openly and honestly with people is a huge part of that.
And I think we even saw that as an example. One of our staff that needed a little bit more connection. We knew we couldn't do it in person, so she created a virtual coffee break, right? And
Mhm.
just come and go. It doesn't matter. You're not obligated to it. But for her, it just gave her some purpose and meaning, and knowing it also was helping others that were feeling like her, but also helping herself just to feel a little bit more connected away from just talking about work when we're connecting.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that connecting with others, well, which is the next part I'm going to talk about, is something that we don't necessarily learn how to do. We're sort of expected to know intuitively, and especially in a sort of Anglo-American culture, is not something. We're very reserved. We have sometimes we have walls up. There's a very being polite is very important. Where in certain other cultures, being loud and being exuberant and expressive is a little bit more acceptable. So for us, sometimes we have to work in our cultural setting. We need a few different techniques. And so um, when I was studying psychology at McGill, I worked in a laboratory on where they looked at romantic and intimate relationships. And a lot of the research I did was creating a feeling of being understood and a feeling of intimacy in close relationships. And so this is valid for all kinds of relationships, from acquaintances to romantic partners, from family members to colleagues. And so we'll talk a little bit about the ways that we can deepen our connections with other people. And so the first step has a little bit less to do with the other person and more to do with ourselves. And so I would describe it as connecting with yourself. And so what I learned in a lot of my research is an important part of creating intimacy with others, and this is sort of a little bit obvious, but is sharing parts of ourselves with them. And in order to be able to share parts of ourselves, we really do have to know who we are. And this can mean a lot of things, and it can be really different for everyone. For some people, it might mean, getting in touch with what my personality is like. Who am I? Am I introverted or extroverted? Am I enthusiastic with lots of energy, or maybe I'm more calm and collected? Some people are just naturally leaders, naturally very ambitious, and other people are maybe like being in more supportive roles, or they're maybe very generous. That's one of their important qualities. And I think we can be all of these things in different situations. And so the key here isn't to try and perfectly define ourselves and fit ourselves into a box, but to sort of get in contact with who we are, and then to really embrace it and really step into it. Sort of like Paula was saying, to what do I like and what do I want, and then just to accept it and to really step into those shoes. And I think another important aspect of this is that we maybe do a little bit less easily is connecting with our emotions. And so this is specifically with the research projects I was doing. We found that when a partner really understands what we're feeling and the types of emotions that we have when we're with them, that will lead us to feel more understood and to lead us to feel a sense of intimacy with that person. So, really making it a priority to check in with yourself and asking yourself, how does this make me feel? How am I feeling right now? And then once we know that, communicating it with the people around us. So, and this can be positive or negative. So maybe I'm feeling frustrated with my work projects at the moment, and just saying it, just sort of communicating that feeling. Or it can be the other side. I'm really excited about things that are coming up, or maybe I'm really happy to see someone, and I'm going to let them know that that's what I'm feeling. Um, and so, looking inwards and connecting with what's there, that really allows us to share that with others more sincerely and bring about a feeling of closeness with those people.
I think that really makes
Um,
sense, right? If you're not going to understand it yourself, it's very hard to explain to other people, because otherwise we just keep saying to them, no, it's not that way. No, I don't feel that way. Yeah, they're just trying to be helpful to figure it out for you. But if you take the time, that really makes sense to me. Before, like Paula said, understanding herself a little bit more about she doesn't need to be that extrovert out in the middle of the crowd all the time, or even after work, but then you're not looking to your partner to guess that out of you as well.
mhm. Well, and I think there's another aspect too, where it kind of makes us more predictable. If I'm sharing regularly, like, oh, well, these sorts of things make me frustrated, and these sorts of things I really love, then the people around us know, and it's fun to be around us because they know how things are going to go. If they want to do something nice for us, they know what to do, or if they want to maybe avoid something that would upset us, they can do that too, and we can really help them in that process.
Mhm.
That's great.
Another Now that we focus a bit on ourselves, I think the natural next step is focusing on the other people and getting in touch with those people. And I think for this, again, it sounds a little bit obvious, but we don't always do it, is being present and empathetic. And so when we're talking about being present, we can talk about being physically present, referring to our body language, to our facial expressions. And this means being open, looking at the person, smiling, nodding, basically just showing them that we're listening and we're engaged. And this is something that I've noticed that I don't feel like I necessarily, I can be checking my phone and still listening to the person that I'm with. I don't think that it necessarily makes a huge difference for me, but it definitely makes a big difference for the other person. And we need to show them that they're being heard and that they're being appreciated. And I think this really allows other people to open up and feel comfortable. And I think we can also talk about being mentally present. And this sort of brings it back to our high stimulation environment. But this means having a clear headspace of not being distracted and not thinking about other things. And this is particularly relevant for the workplace. So if we are only going to have a 15-minute coffee break, well, maybe I'm going to come in there with the intention of taking that 15-minute break, of being present with the people around me, and not I've closed my emails, I've left my phone in my office, I'm just going to take this 15 minutes and we're going to be present with each other and really connect. And then when that's over, I'm going to head right back to doing my thing.
Mhm. Well, and I think it's even like supper tables, right? It's a great break time, supper time, meal time with families. It's a great time to have a no phone zone so you can actually be present and listen and connect.
Yeah. And even on car rides, right? We often say that with
Yeah.
sometimes the best time you can have some really good conversations without it seem confrontational. But if you've got music on, you've got phones happening, and you're even distracted, you're not telling them that what they're about to say is really that important either.
Mhm. Well, and I think this is where everyone sort of believes that they're really great multitaskers, but I think we can actually get a lot out of really focusing our attention on one thing at a time, and really appreciating the power that has.
Well, and the more you connect
Um,
with yourself, I think the more easier it becomes to communicate your needs. So if you're talking with someone and they are texting and you really just need a moment of their time, you need to be able to communicate your needs to them and connect with them. It becomes easier to say, I'll just wait till you're done and then I'll continue talking. And it doesn't come out
mm,
rude, it doesn't come out aggressive because you know what you need and you're okay with expressing that.
mhm. Well, and I think in that vein as well, if there is a distraction that's coming up, you can just say, "Oh, I just hold on a second. I just need to deal with it really
Yeah.
quick, and then I'll be back." And I think that this sort of leads into the empathetic part as well, where yes, we can listen to what someone's saying while we're doing something else, but it's harder for us to connect with what the person is thinking and feeling as well. So, yes, I hear what they're saying, but why are they saying that? What's their
Mhm.
perspective? Where are they coming from? And so we can really put ourselves in their shoes and say, well, what's it like to really be them in this moment? What are they really going through? And that will actually make us feel closer to them, and help us build those connections and really know what it's like to see things from the other perspective.
And I think you had mentioned
Um,
earlier about the body language and cues as well, and that comes with, in that empathetic action, right? If you
mm,
see those, you can act differently upon that. You can see maybe they are a little bit more distressed in what they're telling you, or maybe it's a little bit lighter and you're internalizing it the wrong way because you're not paying attention to
mhm,
those.
Mhm.
mhm. I think we can miss out on there's a lot of information more than the words that are being said. And when we're there, we get a lot more of it and we get a lot more out of it.
Yep.
And I think in line with this empathy, it's a great opportunity, especially when we're finding it difficult. Maybe some people are harder to read than other people, as that we can just ask them what they're feeling. So asking questions. And so I've personally found that I've learned a lot this way, where someone will say something and I just sort of assume that, oh, well, this is why they said it. This is what they're thinking. This is how they're feeling. But I think it's important to go with a genuine curiosity, because we are often more different than we think, different than other people. And so I especially when someone does something I don't understand, I'll often say, oh, that's really interesting. I would have maybe done this. I would have reacted totally different than you would. And this gives them an opportunity to really explain how they're feeling, and for us to give them the benefit of the doubt and see it from their perspective. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it kind of once again removes that judgment and bias that we might be coming to the table with by just asking the questions for some clarification around it. Then we can let that go and actually hear what they're having to say.
Yep. Removing our assumptions as well.
Yeah, because I think I know in my case anyway, a lot of I would just assume that, oh, of course I know. It's obvious. It's obvious what they're thinking. And a lot of the times we're wrong. So
yeah,
it's a good opportunity it can really bring us closer with other people. And I think these questions, it doesn't necessarily have to be with emotions, because maybe with our work colleagues, we're not going to be going into deep emotional discussions, but just people do enjoy talking about themselves and having the space to share about themselves. So if we're wanting to get close with people, going with this curiosity and wanting to know things about them, who are they? What do they do? What are they like? And this can really build intimacy and closeness, and in the long term will help alleviate some of these feelings of loneliness. And I think that this process is very personal, and everyone will have their own way of going about it, which is perfect. So I've sort of outlined some general tips and some things that work for me, but I think the real progress is made when we really make this process our own, and we sort of experiment with what feels right to us and what we like to do when we're trying to be in connection with other people.
And I think that's why we really got ourselves involved with the life coaching piece, because sometimes, it is hard to just dive into a topic like this and actually come up with answers for yourself. Where with the life coaching, we use that wellness wheel to dive into maybe these areas that eventually you can begin to explore, that maybe it is about loneliness, maybe it is about some form of connection, maybe it is about boredom, but it's going to land somewhere there in a concrete way that then you can begin that exploration.
Yeah, I think it really opens the door to doing some really, really positive, concrete work when we sort of dive into some of these more abstract questions.
Yeah, because not everybody has obviously your history and understanding of this topic, right? So sometimes we feel overwhelmed just by that. Oh, I'm not in that industry, so I don't know. This just opens that door that actually you probably do know yourself a little bit better than what you're saying, even though the topics may seem, out of your zone of understanding. We really do and can learn about ourselves and understand how each one of these impact us individually.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these problems, so to say, are a lot more manageable than what we think. We don't have the tools and we don't know where to start. But once we sort of get the ball rolling, we realize, oh, I can see things more concretely. I know what the next steps are, and I can sort of figure things out for myself.
Yeah, and
but more easily than I thought.
And it reduces those feelings of just being simply overwhelmed.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I think just to wrap up, I'm just going to do a quick summary of some of the main ideas that we saw here, really briefly. So we touched on the fact that boredom and loneliness are completely normal emotions. Everyone goes through them from time to time, and that it's if they become overwhelming or interfering regularly in daily life, that's when we need to reach out to seek professional help. But otherwise, these are things that we really can and should be exploring ourselves. And I think we talked a lot about introspection and the importance of using these emotions as signals, as signs to look inwards and try and see what they're telling us. It's almost I find this work to be very fun and enjoyable, because it's almost what is going on? What's my body trying to tell me? What's my brain trying to let me know what's going on? And I think this will hopefully lead us to uncovering some of our needs. So when we feel bored and lonely for a reason, and when we're using these signals properly, they can give us a clue to find out what direction to go in. And then finally, this will allow us to sort of continue on our wellness journeys, and sort of what you were just mentioning, Shannon, just to seek out the tools and to take action to improve our well-being, to feel happier and healthier, and I think to be more in connection with the other people around us.
Mhm. And I'm just brought back to what you said at the beginning, is that we can't always just look at the positive. Sometimes we need to explore some of these more difficult topics to be able to actually move into the more positive. If you're just leaving this unexplored and just leaving this, often um, things will just well up inside you and fester almost before, if you don't look at them.
Mhm.
And I think we said too about, reducing that stigma, right? It's exactly what you said. These emotions are normal. They're normal, no matter what age you are. This isn't about being just children and, oh, you're bored. We can have these emotions and feelings throughout lifetime. And let's look to these things that could have tools that we can build upon as we age, as we mature, as we gain more skill. But it's okay to do that. It's okay to be honest, and okay to take that time to look inward and figure out where we're at.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think just incorporating these things in, and especially the way that we're talking about it, can seem a bit daunting, but really this can be 15 minutes every now and then, or whenever I'm feeling, oh, just I wonder what's going on, instead of burying ourselves in our phones or trying to find a way to avoid it. Just take a couple of minutes to look into it, and then I find even just doing that a lot of the times, without finding a concrete solution, can really help alleviate some of those feelings and really help us work through it just by thinking about it or looking at it head on.
And
That's
bringing,
right, that you had mentioned earlier. It's just bringing that to the table every once in a while. If you're out for that 10-minute walk, just being curious of, hey, what am I feeling today? Why am I
Mhm.
feeling a little bit anxious? Why am I feeling whatever it is you think you might be feeling? And that's okay to explore that. Doesn't mean you have to act upon it, like you said earlier, run out the door, sell your house, and get rid of everybody around you. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean dramatic. You can just be, hey, I am feeling a little lonely. What do I need to do?
Mhm.
yeah, that's pretty
Exactly.
much what I was going to say, is being in the moment, exploring those feelings, being present, just reducing the amount of stimulation. I think these are such great tips and very tangible. And just as we were talking, you can really see the interconnectedness of all of the domains of wellness, and how everything is so interdependent on the other.
But I think
Mhm.
for me, I'm going to use the car light thing a lot.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. And delving, yeah, delving deeper into what's really going on, and realizing that everyone goes through these difficult emotions and has challenges in their lives, and we don't have to be fearful that we are different or damaged or something, that we are just human beings. We're all going through the same experience.
Exactly.
Consider it an opportunity of growth, right? As opposed
Absolutely.
to a challenge that maybe we can't bear.
Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure.
We always like to talk a little bit once we've had our wonderful guests and that bring us all kinds of insightful information, which is awesome, and ideas and strategies couldn't be more helpful, because I think you're right, Josh. This doesn't need to be such a daunting task that you're going to have to now land in therapy immediately and it's going to be hours worth That doesn't mean we have to start there. And that's the essence of this mental health resource hub as well. Maybe you just need to make a few connections. It might just be about your finances that are making you feel anxious or leading to that boredom because you're overwhelmed in the workload or whatever the case might be. That's the point of the resource hub, is you can look there. Maybe just you start off in one area. Maybe that's not where you land down the road, but these will be some resources for you to begin with on your journey. And it's open to anyone and everyone. And we hope that as we build it, it will offer a lot of capacity for what's available within the community you're from as well, not just resources. We often talk about this in rural areas, that people are always offering resources, but then they'll be like 4 hours away or whatever the case may be. And obviously, we're aware that our world has allowed us some different avenues to connect with people, whether that be through virtual or whatever the case might be. But we also want to make sure that we highlight the strengths within our community, and that's also what will be on this hub too. So we
Yeah,
do.
and it is on our website, which is listed below, Sage Wellness Connection. And like Shannon said, the community assets that we have right within our reach are highlighted there.
Yes, and please reach out on both sides, right? If you know of resources that would be helpful to others, we'd love to add it in to the resource hub. But, or if you're looking for resources, do you know this is a building process? It's just new, we started up. So we're just building up who we have there and those connections, like I said. But please reach out anytime, or reach out through the Sage Wellness, and maybe we can send you in a direction that you need to go.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, Josh, for coming and being with us today and exploring this important topic with us. And good luck on your studies in the fall.
Yes,
Awesome.
greatly.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hope to have you again soon.
My pleasure.